Greetings, Earthlings. How y'all doing? I'm doing pretty good. The weather's looking pretty good out there. I think it's the beginning of the summer. I think we can say that the days of rain and cold winter are behind us. And now we just have to look forward to a summer of love. A summer filled with butterflies and zebras and moonbeams and fairy tales. It's nice to be in a different workplace every night, and to come home and read books. So what have I been doing? What have I been reading? Well, the last book that I picked up is this one. Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. I always was interested in the title of that book because it's an Iron Maiden song, Stranger in a Strange Land. And I wasn't sure if it was about the same thing, if it was the same story or not. Like, because I know how Steve Harris likes to write songs like The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and To Tame a Land and all that stuff that's based on books. And then didn't Iron Maiden have a song off of, I think it's on Brave New World, called Out of the Silent Planet? And that's the title of a C.S. Lewis book. I was looking up some of the titles. Actually, at the beginning of this book, there's a whole list of other books by Robert Heinlein. And he's got a book called The Number of the Beast as well. So, yeah, I guess Iron Maiden was just really into this guy or something. And Number of the Beast was written in 1980. So that would put it right there in that time frame for that album, right? Because that album came out in 1982, which gave him plenty of time to write that song beforehand. So yeah, I'm gonna have to check out that book too. So what's up with this Stranger in a Strange Land? Well, I'm 55 pages into it, but this one, Stranger in a Strange Land. So far, I mean, it's a pretty thick book, so it's kind of hard for me to really go into much detail about it. Plus, I probably forgot some of it. I've got Milton Friedman's book, Capitalism and Freedom, and I looked at it, and let's see how far I am in this book. Okay, so Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom. Capitalism and Friedman. Okay, so I'm only on page 27, but this one has a really long, this one has a 33-page preface, or just introduction, because there's several prefaces. And then there's Benjamin Applebaum did the foreword. So, I mean, it's a pretty long introduction. So, yeah, I mean, there's a good 33 pages before the book even starts. So, I guess I'm about 60 pages into it. So, just like every other book, 60 pages in. But I thought about it, and I can't really remember anything about it. It's been like probably 3 months since I picked that book up. And I was trying to remember anything, like what can I remember about that book? And so far the only thing I can remember about it is that capitalism equals good. I guess that's pretty much the crux of the whole book. Is that capitalism is good. Sometimes I have to go back and kind of sort of reread some stuff. Sorry. I just ate something, so that's why I'm all like fidgeting around. I'm having these like little bodily mishaps. These kind of like, because I'm an old man. And okay, so Stranger in a Strange Land. So it's about this guy that he is the product of a Mars expedition. Okay, so the main character, his name is like Michael Valentine or something like that. Valentine Michael Smith. Excuse me. So Valentine Michael Smith is the main character. Sorry, it just doesn't stop. It's just like a gag reel. A gag reel of ineffectual bodily functions. So Valentine Michael Smith is the product of this Martian expedition that happened. And what they did was, I guess it's kind of like Elon Musk, you know, like eventually mankind collectively decided, or somebody decided, that the only way to really sustain the human race was to leave the planet. And so, yeah, I mean, let's leave this planet full of trees and water and everything else that's good and go to a completely deserted planet that is something that probably would be pretty, yeah, there's a lot of boring real estate there. But anyway, so I guess if we're threatened on this planet, you know, we can go to Mars. And so it talks about how initially there was like a lunar station that was set up, and then a space station further out, like halfway between here and Mars, because that's where the ship has to go and fuel up, is at the space station. And so it's like something like a 2-year journey to get there, and they have to fuel up on the way, and then they stay there on Mars for, you know, like a year, close to a year, and then they come back. And so they had to figure out a way that they were going to be able to man this craft. I think they selected 8 people to go, and they had to do it very systematically. They couldn't just like throw some old man on the ship and send him out there. So what they decided to do is to take married couples, and they found married couples to where each member was a specialist in some sort of science, you know, like somebody in the universities, you know, so and so was the professor of this and that, and then his wife was the professor of that and the other. And so that way they had like a nice well-rounded crew. And so they sent this ship to Mars. Once it touched down, I think they may have gotten confirmation that it touched down, but then they never heard anything back from it. There was no report back from this ship. So years later they sent a second one, a second ship, a second voyage. And I guess the members of this crew found the wreckage of the other ship, or they found where it had landed. But they didn't find any of the inhabitants. But somehow, they brought back one guy, and he was the son of one member of one of the married couples and another member of another married couple. So not everybody was completely monogamous there. And so this guy, Valentine Smith, came back. He was born, lived among the Martians. From what is in the book, it's talking about how there is a race of like an indigenous race of Martians that were on the planet, and this Valentine Michael Smith guy was raised by them. So even though he's human, he was raised by these Martians. And so he comes back. I guess the second voyage must have found him and brought him back. And so when they get him back, he has to be put in this hospital because he is not used to the environmental conditions of Earth. He's used to the environmental conditions of Mars. And so they've got him in this bed, and he can barely move, and they're rehabilitating him, and he's having to learn how to walk and all this stuff, and he can't even really speak English, and so he's sort of learning English very slowly as he's kind of getting his bearings in the hospital, and he becomes sort of the subject of some political debates. There's some debate as to whether or not he actually somehow owns all of Mars, because he's the only human colonist that went there and was and actually returned and survived, apparently. So I don't know if there are any other survivors at this point. But at this point, it seems like he owns the deed to the whole planet. And so I don't know if they want to kill this guy, if they're going to try and get him to sign it over. I think that there were some reporters that came to like interview him, and one of them like stuck this contract in his face that would like negate his any possible claim that he would have to basically ruling Mars, because they want to go back there and set up more colonies. And at this point, this guy seems like he's got a stake in I guess the entire planet. He's going to own the planet or something. There's some legal debate, and so there's lawyers that are involved, and they're trying to figure it out. In the meantime, all of the media is trying to get to this guy, and so they have him in a hospital, and there's a guy who's a reporter and his girlfriend who's a nurse who works in the hospital, and they're talking about him, and she goes in and talks to this Valentine Michael Smith guy. She's not supposed to be talking to him because they're saying not to bring any women around this guy. Like, when he first arrives, there's a certain like military commander that's sort of in charge of this guy, and he sort of lays down the law. I guess that's the Trump guy. His name is Trump, like Donald Trump. This guy decides that he doesn't want any women around this guy while he's rehabilitating. I don't know why. I don't know if it's going to stress the guy out, like he's never seen a woman. I don't know what the deal is. And so, but this lady, who's this reporter's girlfriend, she sort of sneaks in his room and shares a glass of water with him. And so when she does that, she creates this sort of bond with the guy, that they shared water. And so he's almost like has this sort of like infantile connection towards her. And at this point in the story, since like he can't really talk very well, like he can't really speak English, and he's sort of incapacitated, he's almost like a big baby at this point. But I'm thinking that changes eventually, because I mean, just from some side stuff I've read about the story, this guy ends up becoming like a really powerful leader. I know that one of the interesting things about this book, and what kind of drew my attention to it, when I was reading Tom O'Neill's Chaos, which is the book about Charles Manson and his involvement with the CIA, is that when Charles Manson first got out of prison, I don't know if it was really obsessed with this character, this Valentine Michael Smith character, and he was, I don't know if he was trying to be like him. I think he was influenced by him as far as like wanting to create like a cult around himself and to be this sort of godlike figure for all of his cult. And he was inspired by this book, and so it just kind of made me interested in the book. For some reason, I read a lot of articles, and then I read Tom O'Neill's book. And Tom O'Neill's book contrasts very starkly with Helter Skelter, having been written by Vincent Bugliosi, who was the prosecuting. It's basically rigged, and his whole narrative for Manson was contrived. And so there was a lot of BS that went into that in order for him to win that case, and that he had actually tampered with evidence in the middle of that case and in the middle of that trial. In order to get that trial, in order to get a win, he had to basically spin a yarn. And so Tom O'Neill spends time bringing forth documents that sort of debunk a lot of the stuff that Bugliosi, had included in his narrative. And Tom O'Neill's information brought out all this really crazy stuff that connected Manson with the CIA. That when he was incarcerated, that they had actually done some like MK Ultra type experiments on him, and that his parole officer was in cahoots with one of the MK Ultra guys. Can't remember his name off the top of my head, but so back to Stranger in a Strange Land. I was just saying that this book had influenced Charles Manson in his quest for creating a cult around himself and having these devoted followers. And so it got me kind of interested in reading this book. I've seen the book around. It's a popular book. A lot of people know about it. A lot of people have read it. I used to have a Robert Heinlein book called Farnham's Freehold. And I think I threw it away. I didn't even read it. I threw away a lot of books. I know it sucks to say that. I feel embarrassed to say that I threw away books. But at one time I really had to move out of my house quickly and I had to dump a lot of stuff. And so I just downloaded it. I downloaded a PDF. I've been doing that a lot. I've been downloading a lot of PDFs. I'm going to get myself in trouble. Does anybody ever get in trouble for downloading PDFs online? I've downloaded a ton of books. And so, yeah, I mean, Stranger in a Strange Land. Where did I get to? So the point that I got to in the book. Okay, there's a lady who works in the hospital. What happens is that she and the journalist boyfriend of hers, she lets him know that she visited with Smith and that, she made contact with him and that she created this bond with him by sharing water with him. Just the simple fact that they shared a glass of water, like, bonded them somehow. Well, what ended up happening is that he disappeared out of the hospital that he was staying at, but he didn't really. He disappeared. She got together with her boyfriend, and they were talking about him, and they had kind of figured out some things about him because her boyfriend was covering the story. And so something happened to where they had planted some recording devices in his hospital room. And she met with him, and I have to fill in the blank of what happened after that because I don't really remember. But I do remember that they saw a thing on TV, I guess. It's not really TV. It was some sort of like a 3D thing, because it's the future. But basically he showed up on TV. But it wasn't really him. It was a fake guy. Like, it was an imposter. And she pointed it out right away. She's like, no, I hung out with that dude. That's not the guy. And her boyfriend's like, are you sure? He kind of doubted her. And she got all angry because he doubted her, right? Of course. The woman. So they kind of went their separate ways. And he decided he was going to go and try and set up an interview with this guy. And he went to wherever he was supposedly kept. Wherever this guy was supposedly kept. And he got in and he met with him for a moment. But it turned out that he met with the imposter. That it wasn't really Michael Smith that he met with. That Michael Smith actually was really back at the hospital that the girlfriend was working at, but they now had him in hiding. Of course, they had to keep him hidden away from different journalists and stuff. And so what was going on was there was an older woman who was in the hospital, who was in the indigent section, the poor people who can't really afford premium treatment or whatever. They were on a different floor. Well, they brought this woman from that area up into Valentine Michael Smith's room. K12 was the name of the room. I remember that much. And so they had this lady in there, and she was sort of the red herring. She was sort of the decoy. So they had her in the room, and she was being watched. But in this kind of side room, they had the Martian guy, the guy from Mars, the man of Mars, was in this sort of side room, like beside the room that she was in. Just sort of like a smaller, like she was like in this sort of main area, and then he was in the side room. And so he was being hidden in the side room. And she just by chance, this is the girlfriend of the journalist, just by chance, I'm going to find out her name real quick. What is her name? Jill. So Jill, since she worked in the hospital, she's trying to find a way to try to find this guy, because her and her boyfriend basically came to the conclusion that he was probably somewhere in the hospital, and she was going to try and find out where. And I guess the guy that was the doctor who was in there, who was supposed to be watching him 24/7, I don't know if he had to take a piss or what, but he was basically like, I need to get out of here for a second. When she poked her head in, he said, come on in and watch this old lady for me, and I'll be right back. In the meantime, Jill was trying to find this certain bed, like this electric bed. And so she went into that side room and discovered that that was where they were keeping Smith. And she saw him there, and as soon as he saw her, he lit up and was all excited to see her, because of course they had shared a glass of water. And so he begged her to stay, and she's like, no, I gotta go, I'm not supposed to be in here. And he was like, you're mad at me? She's like, no, it's not like that. I just, I'm going to get in really big trouble if I'm in here, so I got to go. But I'll be back, don't forget me. And so that was sort of where I left off in the book. I didn't really get that far. Okay, so I've been reading my Bible. This is the English Standard Version. I really like this edition because the letters, the format, it's pretty large print, which is good for me because my eyesight's going bad. I've got these horrible reading glasses. This is what I actually read with. They look like, I believe that it's a woman's glasses, but I wear these when I read because it all has to do with I'm like an ape trying to move around in this bed. So this book, I already talked about it, The Possessed, Fyodor Dostoevsky. The lettering is so small in this book that I had to get a pair of magnifying glasses to read it. And at first I got these 3.0 glasses, which proved to be a little bit too magnifying, and I had to hold the book straight up to my face to read it. So I got these. I think these are maybe 2.5s or 2.0s. These are a little better. They're a little more moderate. I still have to hold the book kind of close. But I didn't get those glasses until I got that book, that Dostoevsky book. And I read the whole book. And now that I've read that whole book with glasses, now I can't read at all without glasses. I have to have glasses in order to read. So I think the glasses actually messed up my eyesight. Even worse, I should have just got a different copy of that book, because that's the book that tipped me over the edge. Now, I'm at the age where most people start wearing glasses when they read. And so I think it maybe would have happened anyway, but it's just gotten worse and worse. My eyesight's gotten worse. If I'm going to read anything, I have to put glasses on. But this book, this Bible, this English I love the way it feels. It's just a really nice volume. It's flexible. It's leather. It's very easily readable because of the print. It's very good. Very good format. There's no notes. There's no references. It's just the text. And the cadence of the language, it's much easier to read than the King James Version, this English Standard Version. And I was sold on the King James Version. I mean, my dad was really into the King James Version. And honestly, I didn't like it that much when I was growing up because it was really hard to read. The language is sort of abstruse for somebody who is used to reading like Stephen King books. But and so when I was in high school, I got the NIV version, the New International Version. And I held on to that volume for a long time. I don't know what happened to it. I might have actually... Gosh, should I say I threw it away? I don't know if I threw it away. I might have thrown it away because my dad really hated the NIV version. And he told me that it's so watered down that if you adhere too closely to the NIV version, he used to say, that it could actually be detrimental to your salvation. And so I think he was trying to say that some of the language is sort of diluted and some of the message is lost. And that was his opinion of the NIV version. But I've gotten more curious. So I don't know if I threw that NIV version away. I think I was just listening to, I thought about what my dad said. Then I thought, well, I don't have any reason to have this. I have the English Standard Version. I've got the King James Version. It should be pretty much all I need. And so I don't know if I tossed that NIV version or not. But I have another one that actually, ironically, I inherited from my dad. He had his own NIV copy, and I actually have it right here. And it's very close to the one that I had. It looks a lot like the one I had. I don't know though, this might be the one. This might be the one I had in high school. I don't think so though. I think this was my dad's. I don't know. It's blue. Mine was blue, but this one seems like a darker blue. I don't think this was mine. I think this was my dad's. But I just started reading it recently, from the beginning. So this English Standard Version I have, I'm kind of jumping around. And one thing that my dad used to do with his Bibles is he had like a tally on the back, like on the empty pages in the back. There's several blank pages where you can write notes. He would write all the names of the books of the Bible and then do a tally of how many times he'd read each book. And so, I mean, I haven't read any of the books more than twice, 2 or 3 times. I think I might have read a couple of them maybe 3 times. But I have yet to get through the entire Bible all the way through. And I read up through Jeremiah, which is where I'm at right now. And I've read a lot of the New Testament, most of the New Testament. So there's only a few books in the New Testament I haven't read. But I still have about 10 books in the Old Testament I haven't read. But I've gotten all the way through Jeremiah, which is, that's a good 1,200 pages into the Bible. Yeah, I'm at like page 1,221. I've read everything previous to this. So with Jeremiah, okay, so Jeremiah comes after Isaiah, and Isaiah is a prophetic book, and so is Jeremiah. They're both prophets. Isaiah and Jeremiah were both prophets. Jeremiah was a bullfrog, actually. But in Isaiah, the main, like looking back at reading that, the main takeaway that I get from Isaiah is that God is coming back. Okay, he's going to return. So don't fall away from him, because if you forget about God and you backslide in your life to where you're not living a God-centered life, then you will fall into sin, which will begin to overtake you over time. And once sin begins to overtake you, then you fall out of God's favor, and he will begin to leave you alone, which is the worst thing that can happen. The best thing that you can hope for in a God-centered life is for God to kind of shake you up every now and then and remind you where your life is headed, and what you're doing with your life. And that's why we go to church, that's why we read the Bible, and that's why we pray. And with that sort of triune, or sort of trifecta there of prayer, scripture study, and church, that we stay focused in our path, and that keeps us on track. But if we fall away from God and ignore his laws and live not in accordance with his plan, then we fall away, and like a good shepherd, he will sort of bring us back into the fold from time to time through our own conscience and our own compunction. But what Isaiah warns about is falling away from God, and to the point to where he doesn't come after us anymore. And that's repeated multiple times in the scriptures, where God says eventually he'll leave you to your sin. If that's what you want, that's what you're going to get. And that's what you're going to end up with. And you wind up with the consequences of that, because the consequences of sin, the wages of sin is death. So the more we fall into sin, it's not necessarily that we're hurting God. It's that we are killing ourselves. We are actually destroying our own lives through our sin. That those sins have a natural effect on our lives, which degrades us, and which it will destroy us eventually. And so, God, using the church and using his scripture, and in our relationship with him, he sort of scoops us back in. And so what I got from Isaiah is that God's coming back. He's not going away. Not only is he not going away, he's coming back. So you have to stay vigilant in your spiritual life. Otherwise, you're going to get destruction. And God loved the Jews. They were his chosen people. By extension, the Christians are God's chosen people as well. And so we are his people, and he will come after us. He will try to bring us back in. I mean, if he wants, he will bring us back in. But eventually, at some point, if we are ignoring him and ignoring his laws and not living according to salvation, then he's not going to keep coming after us. And it's up to us to maintain that relationship with him. So I believe that he comes and gets us, but we have a part to play in maintaining that relationship, and that responsibility is to the access that we actually have to him, which is prayer, Scripture, and church. And so without those things, we're not maintaining our relationship with Christ. And so, to me, the message of Isaiah is that God's coming back. Maintain that relationship. Keep strong in your relationship with God. And so the very next book is Jeremiah. And to me, what I'm getting, Jeremiah goes back to a more of a historical narrative where it talks about the time before, during, and I'm not finished with it yet, so I'm guessing after Babylon takes over Israel and Judea, or Israel and Judah, sorry. Where Jeremiah is used to warn the people, to warn the government, like the king, to warn the priests, and to warn the people of Israel and Judah that they are going to fall, that they are going to be captured by Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon and enslaved if they don't turn their life around and stop sinning the way they are. And so there was a lot of false prophets and false teachers in the upper classes and in the upper, like the kings were surrounding themselves with priests and quote-unquote prophets who were prophesying falsely, saying that they were, these people had fallen into a lot of pagan activity. And they were ignoring God's laws. And so God spoke through Jeremiah to constantly remind the authorities in Israel and Judah that they were going to be taken over. And he told them explicitly, that the northern armies were going to come down and attack them and capture them, and that these kings were going to be killed, and their people, their servants were going to be killed, and they were going to be taken into captivity, and Israel would be left a desolation, like a waste. No more people, no more animals. Everything swept away, everything burned down and flattened to the ground. And so God promised Jeremiah that he wouldn't allow him to be killed by these authorities, but they did capture him and they put him away, and they actually even lowered him into a cistern, like a well, where he was naked and starving. And eventually a eunuch from Ethiopia arranged to have him brought back up, because he went to the king and said he's gonna die down there. And so they rescued him and they locked him up, and the king made a deal with him. He said, "Look, just tell me the truth." And so Jeremiah told him, "Well, the truth is, you're going to be put to death. You're going to die, and your kingdom's going to be taken away. It's going to be burned to the ground. Your daughters are going to be taken." And so he was protected, because there was a lot of people that wanted to come after him and kill him for what he was saying, because they were saying that you're discouraging the army. Like, you're going around telling everybody that we're going to be taken over and we're going to be losing this war, and we're going to be attacked, we're going to lose. Don't be telling our military that, because they're going to lose their spirit. They're going to lose their morale. We can't have you affecting their morale in that way. And so they did a lot of stuff to him to discourage him from continuing to bring this message of gloom and doom, that they were going to be taken over by Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. But that's what happened. The Chaldeans came. I'm thinking the Chaldeans were the army of Babylon. That's what I think. I might be mistaken in that. But the Chaldean army came and invaded, and they did their best to hold them off, but it was prophesied through Jeremiah that they were going to lose, and God told Jeremiah, I am going to allow Israel to be taken over this time. But it's funny because I don't want to say he vacillated in that, but he kept saying, but, all they have to do is to obey my laws and I won't make it happen. And he said, I'm going to make it happen. No, because he knew that they weren't going to obey his laws. He knew that they were going to keep ignoring him and rejecting him. But God kept telling Jeremiah, he said, all they have to do is change their ways and I won't make it happen. But just through their own stubbornness. This is a recurring theme in the Bible with Israel. Israel is symbolic of the believer, of me and you and everybody. As believers, we fall away and we ignore God's laws. And so Israel is that child of God, this wayward son that keeps falling away. And David had these problems too. To me, David is a type of Saul in the New Testament, who becomes Paul, is used as an example of how badly you can be in sin and still rebound. And Israel teaches us that. David taught us that. David was God's favorite king. He loved David, but David kept messing up, and Israel kept messing up. But he always promised, "These are my people. All they have to do is come back to me, and I will be their God." And Saul was killing Christians. He was persecuting and killing Christians until he had his awakening. He became Paul. That just goes to show how bad you can be and still come back. That there's no sin that's so big that God can't forgive it. So that's what I've been reading about in the Old Testament. Okay, so this is a really old volume. Look how old. This is that 1950s looking book, this kind of volume. The Scribner Library. So The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald. I've always kind of been interested in that book a little bit. You're supposed to read it in high school. One of the projects I've sort of been tackling is going back and reading all those books I was supposed to read in high school. Well, I'm only 50 pages into it. And I'm at the part in the book where he goes to the party. He's the poor guy that lives next door to Gatsby. And he goes to the party, Gatsby's party. And I get this really weird impression of Gatsby. He's like this Bruce Wayne kind of character. There's a part where when Gatsby goes to the party and he runs into that chick that he met over at his cousin's house, they make her seem like she's kind of hot, kind of a hoity-toity, kind of a high society girl. And she's like a professional tennis player or golfer or something. I think she's a golfer. And so he sees her at the party, and of course, since he kind of knows her a little bit, he kind of talks to her, and I get the feeling that there's gonna be some sparks there between them two. She's kind of already got a date there, but it's kind of a superficial coupling. Like, he kind of sees her date as being sort of, this guy, he's kind of a douche. There's this part where they kind of break away, and they kind of decide that they're going to go looking for Gatsby because they hadn't met him yet. And so they go into this room that looks like a private room. It turns out to be a big library inside this guy's mansion. And there's a drunk dude inside the library, and he's kind of like sitting on a table looking at a bunch of books, marveling that the books are actually real and not just like fake cardboard cutout books to make the shelves look cool, you know, that they're actually real books. And I get the impression, I don't know because I haven't read far enough yet. I mean, like, you probably know if you read it in high school. I'm getting the impression that that was Gatsby, but the guy didn't claim to be Gatsby. He claimed to be a guest. But it kind of took on the same vibe as in Batman when Vicky Vale and her little nerdy orbiter beta male co-worker were walking through the Bruce Wayne's sort of museum, and the guy's talking a bunch of crap about, like, you know, all this excess stuff that Bruce Wayne's got, and Bruce Wayne comes up behind them, or he goes, I wonder where that suit of armor came from, and Bruce Wayne said, it's from Japan. It comes up behind him. He's like, that's from Japan. And he said, well, how do you know? And he said, well, because I bought it in Japan. I kind of got the same vibe from this part in the book when they go into the library and see that guy kind of marveling at the books. In the book that he shows him, that book was first introduced in The Great Gatsby when our hero, our main character, goes to his cousin's house, and her husband is there. Her husband's like this real jock dude, like he's this total asshole, just a really superficial, like what you'd expect of like an ex high school football player, you know, like someone whose glory days were in high school, and now he's kind of settled into adulthood, and he's really well off, he's got money, and he's cheating on his wife, who is our main character's cousin. What's really funny is in the very first page of The Great Gatsby, I gotta get this guy's name. It's bugging me now. What's the dude's name? Nick is the guy, is the main guy. And then Miss Baker is the golfing chick. She's only spoken of as Miss Baker at that first meeting until the very end when it was revealed who she was, and then Nick realized that she was kind of a famous golfer. And so at the outset of the book, Nick talks about how as he grew up, he sort of had this gift of not being judgmental towards people, and that sometimes it seemed like a bit of a curse, and sometimes it was kind of a gift, that he had this talent for being non-judgmental. But in the narrative of the story, which is written in the first person, he pretty much just, I don't want to say he talks shit about everybody, but he's very cynical and points out like all the defects in everybody's personality. So although he deems himself to be very non-judgmental, he portrays all the characters according to their vice. It's actually quite funny. Let me follow a little bit of the narrative. This guy moves out to this sort of island, like this peninsula off Long Island. I can't remember if he lives in West Egg or East Egg, but he rents this little ramshackle, like basically a shack, and it's next door to a huge mansion. So all his neighbors are rich, but he's got this little shack, almost like a bungalow or like a cottage. And then so this Gatsby guy is his next door neighbor, and he has this huge mansion and has all these big parties all the time. So he goes to visit his cousin in East Egg or whatever, and her husband, who just moved into this house, and they have a little girl, I think. They have a baby. and they don't bring the baby out the whole time that he's there visiting. He's there for dinner, and the whole time the baby's asleep. And they have this kind of hoity-toity chick hanging out, this kind of groovy. The whole thing portrays this sort of high society of the 1920s, the rich people of Long Island. So this kind of groovy chick that seems like she's probably pretty attractive, kind of athletic. She's a golfer anyway, so to whatever extent golfing is athletics. Of course, his cousin's husband is sort of a famous athlete, kind of more of like a high school, college famous athlete, and they're all done with college now. So I can't remember if he went to college with the guy. He's kind of an asshole, and so it is revealed that he's cheating on his wife, and that she knows about it. And so like his girlfriend like calls like right in the middle of dinner, and so he goes in the house and the wife kind of disappears. It's like basically all their conversations that they're having are sort of like barely masking this thing that's going on underneath the surface, where his girlfriend, his mistress, is calling up in the middle of dinner while they're trying to socialize. And while they're in the other room, this kind of hoity-toity chick, this whatever her name is, Miss Baker, she's like, oh yeah, that's his girlfriend that's calling. And so there's this kind of gossip going on. Like, he doesn't even know this girl. This main character is almost like a Holden Caulfield kind of a guy. He reminds me a little bit of Holden Caulfield. He's a little bit almost like Bork from The Fountainhead. He's just this really cynical, kind of really observant, kind of smart dude who doesn't who hates fakery, who doesn't like fake people. And everybody around this guy's kind of fake. So he's the only kind of poor guy. He had been in the army. He was in the war, I guess World War One. So he was in World War One. He's from Chicago. He moves to New York. His cousin basically lives right across the Gulf or whatever. She's one of the rich ones, but her husband's cheating on her. So the very next day, I think, or soon after this little dinner that they have, this jock husband of his cousin says, hey, I'm going to take you to go meet my girlfriend. And he's like, what? So they get on the train and they stop at this like a service station. And so she's the wife of the owner of a service station. And so with her, they take the train like into Long Island, and they end up going to this house. She's got her own apartment there or something. So but her neighbors are like this photographer and wife, and they have this little party where they just proceed to get totally hammered. And this was the funny part. This was the part to me that was really hilarious. Was him kind of sitting in this living room and having a bunch of rich drunk people around him, just kind of getting high on their own supply and just talking shit about poor people, and just talking crap about everybody they know, and just being like really rich, disgusting assholes basically. And this little get together concludes with his cousin's husband basically punching his girlfriend, his mistress, and breaking her nose, and just ruining the party, and of course he's not going to be held accountable for this because he's some rich asshole, and of course he's the money in the room. And so he basically punches his girlfriend in the face because she mentions his wife, and she's bleeding all over the couch. And so our hero, our main character, Nick, I guess his name is, decides to leave, and he kind of takes the photographer back to his house. Like, the photographer is like drunk and wants to go home, so he kind of tucks the guy in, and the guy's trying to show him his portfolio. And then he goes back to the train station to try and kind of get himself home. Was waiting for this train. And then so the next scene is like a week later. He starts noticing his neighbor, this Gatsby guy, kind of standing outside, and he's having all these parties every night, and eventually Nick gets invited to this party, and so he goes, but he doesn't know anybody there. And until he sees Miss Baker, he sees her there, and so he kind of hangs out with her for a bit and sort of meets some of her shitty friends. Anyway, that's The Great Gatsby as I have come to understand it so far. Okay, so this book, Crime and Punishment, I think I showed a different copy of it before that I'd gotten from the same library. It's a different copy, different translation. I went and did this whole bit and I wasn't even recording. I gotta say it all again. Raskolnikov, the main character, the book starts out, he leaves his apartment, he owes his landlady money, he goes downstairs, goes to this sort of pawn shop where this lady runs this pawn shop. He goes in there and sells his father's watch to her. He already owed her some money, so she doesn't give him very much. For some reason, he's considering murdering this woman. And he thinks about doing it right then and there, but he kind of chickens out. He leaves, goes downstairs, goes down the road. He's basically wearing these old torn up clothes. And so what's revealed about him is that the guy was recently a student and has left college. I don't think he's completed his work, but he can still go back. And he is not doing anything with his education. Like, he's got the opportunity to be a tutor and to teach kids or whatever. He's not doing that. And the guy's barely scraping by. He owes his landlady a bunch of money. He's about to get kicked out. He just sold his watch for a lot less than what it's worth. He takes the money and he goes down the street to a bar, and while he's in the bar he meets this guy, this man, who is this miserable dude who basically squandered all of his family's money, and his daughter is now prostituting herself in order to support him and his wife and his other kids. And he's allowing this to happen because he's a drunken idiot, and he basically, in that scene, he spends the rest of his family's money on getting drunk in the bar. Raskolnikov feels bad for the guy, goes back to his apartment with him, sees his wretched family with the guy's wife who's just screaming at him and pulling the guy's hair out, dragging him around by his hair, and he's letting her do it because he knows that he deserves it. Like, he's so self-loathing that he allows his wife to just beat on him over what he's done. And the kids are crying and screaming because they're hungry, and she's beating the kids because they're making too much noise. So she's beating these kids who are crying because they're starving. And meanwhile, his teenage 14-year-old daughter is sitting in the corner, and she's been prostituting herself all week. And she's supporting the family, and he just spent the rest of her money that she earned by having sex with, perverts, basically. And so Raskolnikov feels terrible for these people. I mean, it's the most abject scene you can imagine. This family, just the destitution of this family, and the hopelessness of what they're facing at that very moment in time. And so he feels terrible for these people. So he kind of he doesn't tell them that he's giving them money. He just takes some of the money that's left over from his father's watch after going to a bar, and he leaves this kind of pile of money there. Just not a lot, just some pocket change, basically. And then he leaves. And so it's kind of revealed that Raskolnikov is not very good with money. He's very irresponsible. He's not taking matters into his own hands. He's kind of being a bitch. He's not really being a man and taking care of himself. In fact, it's revealed in the next scene that his mom and his sister are subsidizing his living, and they don't have anything. And so he's letting his mom send him money when he could be doing. He's an able-bodied young man. He's a good-looking dude. He doesn't have really any nice clothes, but he's just being complacent and kind of settling for this kind of low existence. So he goes back to his apartment, and this sort of servant of his landlady is there, this young girl. She's about his age, I'm guessing. And she delivers a letter to him from his mom. And he's like, okay, well, get out of here. I want to read this letter. And so he starts reading the letter. And his mom is sort of pouring out her devotion and dedication to him, and how she's doing everything she can to send him money. And she sends him, there's some money enclosed in the envelope. And she tells him the news about his sister is getting married. This is the part where I sort of left off last time. Okay, I had to edit this little section in because earlier when I was talking about Crime and Punishment, I left out a whole section. After Raskolnikov was pondering all the implications of the letter from his mother, and what his sister was going to have to go through, and what his mother was going to have to go through, and the shame that he was going to feel as a result of all of this, with his sister going off and marrying this guy, presumably so that she could afford to support him in some way, whether it's this guy hiring him or some kind of subsidy. But he kind of saw through the delusion of his mother and their foolishness, and he realized that they're not going to get anything out of this guy. This guy's just going to marry his sister, put her on the back burner, do nothing for the mother, and she's just going to wither away into old age. And he is going to be completely humiliated and ashamed, because he is an able-bodied man who should be working. He should be supporting them instead of the other way around. So he's really resentful about this whole idea. And I think that the purpose that this kind of serves in the story, this anger that he feels as a result of this letter he received from his mother, and the whole idea that his sister was going to basically put herself at the mercy of this guy she's not even attracted to, just in order to take care of him, almost kind of whoring herself out in a way. But they're doing it because they love him, because he's the beloved in the family, and they believe in him, and he doesn't even believe in himself. He has completely neglected his talents, and he's not working, he's not doing anything. He's just kind of wasting away. And they're willing to sacrifice everything for him. So this whole thing is making him pretty angry, and already there's this idea festering about him kind of wanting to murder and rob the pawnbroker. So he's already planning it, and he's thinking about it. He leaves the house and decides that he is going to contact an old school friend of his. So I think I had thought earlier that he actually spoke to the guy. So he thought about the guy and had seen the guy around town and was going to try and kind of hit him up for some work, because the guy was able to get him some students so that he could make, at least some nominal money. He's thinking about this guy that he went to school with, and he's thinking about going to visit him, but he decides, not now, I'm not going to do it now. First I'm going to do this woman in, I'm going to kill this lady, so he's got his mind set on wanting to kill this woman. And so he's like, I'm going to do the deed first, and then I'll go to Razumian, I think is his name, to seek some employment. And so he's thinking about all this, and as he's walking down the street, he sees this woman, this young lady, presumably 18 or 19 years old, and she's visibly drunk, and she's stumbling down the street, and her dress is sort of torn, and it looks like it's been haphazardly kind of tucked back, like someone had violated her, like she had either prostituted herself or somebody got her drunk and took advantage of her. And she was sort of drunk and kind of hanging on this park bench. So Raskolnikov kind of went over to her, and he'd noticed that there was this sort of man on the other side of the street kind of stalking her. And this part kind of harkens back to Dostoevsky's story White Nights meets sort of the love of his, the main character sort of meets the love of his life, this Nastyenka. He sees this kind of beautiful girl. This is different story now. This is White Nights, not Crime and Punishment. where the main character, who never talks to any women ever, he lives in Petersburg, doesn't talk to anybody, has no friends, has no girlfriend, has no life. He's just a complete introvert, sort of a Nietzsche kind of a guy. So he sees this young lady who's like a potential suitor for him. She's, pretty and his age and everything, and he's totally scared to talk to her. He decides he's going to approach her, but she kind of looks at him and like gives him the body language, like, stay away. She doesn't want to talk to him. He could tell just right off the bat that she kind of freezes him out. And she keeps walking, and some kind of perverted guy sort of starts stalking her. So it's kind of the same situation as in this story. And this guy approaches this girl, Nastyenka. It turns out to be her name, unfortunate name. And so he kind of like flexes up on the guy and kind of scares the guy off. And so that sort of starts his conversation with this Nastyenka girl. And he sort of lays it all out for her and tells her, like, it just kind of wears his heart on his sleeve. Just exactly how you don't want to be if you're trying to pick up on some chick. Like, he's basically like, I'm a nobody, like, I never talk to any women, you're the only woman that I'm ever going to talk to, like, so, don't shut me out, please. He's really being a complete beta male. And so she kind of, she's probably a little bit bored, and she's willing to humor this guy a little bit. She kind of sees that he's pathetic, but she lets him spit the line. And so she agrees to meet him later. And then when she comes back and he finally meets her, she says, I really shouldn't be leading you on here. Like, just so you know, like, nothing is going to happen. He's like, no, it's okay. I just want to, be around you, smell your air, be around a woman, touch your hand, whatever it takes, because I'm, this lonely, pathetic guy. And so he tells her, like, his whole life story, and then he kind of elicits a little bit of her story, and it kind of comes out that when she was young, she had this blind grandmother who was like this seamstress, and she used to actually sew the little girl's garment to her garment so that she couldn't leave her side. And as it turns out later in the story, like, this guy kind of falls for this girl and really, like, falls like madly in love with her, and she can't come see him again because her grandmother won't let her. The same woman who, like, sewed her, to her clothes when she was a kid, and wouldn't let her leave her side for 1 minute. Still won't let her leave her side for 1 minute, and tells her she doesn't want her seeing this guy. And so this chick disappears, and it's all about this guy just getting his heart broken, just losing any hope of love, ever. Like, this is like the last straw. This is like the only woman he's ever gonna try to be with. And she ends up saying, sorry, like, my grandma won't let me, bye. And she disappears, and he's just like basically screaming her name through the night, looking for her everywhere and can't find her anywhere. And it's kind of a sad story. It's a pathetic story. But anyway, so back to Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov sees this debilitated, drunken, inebriated hooker, kind of, just a young woman who is at least taken advantage of at some point, crashing into this park bench. And so he sees this kind of pervert across the street who's stalking around her, trying to get her alone so he can take her into an alley and have his way with her. And so Raskolnikov sees this, and he kind of turns around and flexes up on the guy, sort of like the dude from White Nights. And the guy's like, raises his cane up like he's ready to fight him, and he's gonna fight this dude. And this cop grabs him from behind. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, you see this girl over here? She's drunk, and she's, she looks like she's up to no good. Look at her dress, it's torn. Like, who put her dress back like that? It's like a man did that, and the cop was like, oh man, you're right, like, she looks terrible, we gotta help this poor girl. And he goes, yeah, that other guy across the street's trying to get her alone so he can take advantage of her. I'm not gonna let it happen. We're not gonna let it happen, are we? And the cop's like, oh, that poor girl, poor thing. Yeah, well, I'll take care of it. Thank you, just go about your way. And as Raskolnikov's leaving, he sort of almost has a change of heart. He doesn't really want to be this Captain Save-A-Ho anymore. And he's just like, you know what? He calls to the cop. He goes, just let them be. Let them have her. Who cares? Why do you care? I don't care. And the cop just looks at him like he's crazy. So he moves on. And I think it's at this point that he starts thinking about his friend that can hook him up with some employment. This Razumian guy. And he decides that he'll talk to the guy later after he kills the pawnbroker. And so he's kind of walking back. He's kind of hungry and a little bit thirsty. Kind of like the couple days before when he stopped in that one bar and ended up meeting up with that, that loser guy who sold out his family for alcohol. So he goes into this little tavern and he has like a piece of pie and some vodka. Again, he's like running out of money. He has hardly any money left, and he's just kind of wasting his money on stupid shit. So he decides to, have a vodka, and a piece of pie, which this guy should be probably trying to find a way to get some cheaper food instead of going out and sitting in restaurants and bars and stuff. He has a drink, and as he's kind of feeling a little bit sick. He's kind of like got like a little bit of a fever going on. What ends up happening is that he decides to go home, but he's really getting woozy from this vodka. His head's kind of swimming because he hasn't had vodka in a long time. And he kind of goes into this little, like a little bush area and takes a little nap outside. I don't know if people do this in Russia all the time, but he sees a bush and he just basically goes and passes out in the bush for a little while. Well, while he's sleeping, he falls into this really crazy dream. He has this really intense dream that takes him back to his childhood, almost like Jung talks about like certain dreams are very symbolic, and so some dreams are big dreams. There's some dreams that are just little dreams, and sometimes your dreams kind of build into something as you move on your path of individuation, that there's symbolism within the dream, but sometimes you have a really big major dream. And so this kind of does it. This dream takes him back to his childhood. And he's walking with his dad, and they're walking to go and visit the churchyard where the grave of his little brother is, because he had a little brother who was stillborn, or he died in his infancy, something like that. And so, like once in a while they go and visit the grave, and he'll like kiss the grave of his little brother, and say a prayer and all this stuff. And so they're on their way there, and they're passing a tavern on their way, and they look up and they see that there's this guy who's got this sort of a real fancy stagecoach that would usually be drawn by a big sturdy horse, and he's got this like old nag, this horse that's beyond its expiration date, very weak old horse, and it's hitched up to this thing, and it has no chance of pulling it in any way. And he gathers up a bunch of his drunk friends, and he's in this stagecoach, and he starts whipping the horse, trying to get it to. He's like, get it up, come on, horse. And the horse is just kind of, it's trying, it's doing its best to pull, but it can't even get this coach started. And he's just beating the shit out of this horse, okay, just whipping the fuck out of it. And like the other drunkards who are there with him are sort of cheering him on. And there's some people that are kind of standing off the distance and going, hey, why are you doing that to that horse? And he goes, you guys mind your own business. This is my property. It's my horse. I'll do what I want with it. And he's beating on this horse. And his kind of like group of drunken friends that are there, they're egging him on, this sort of mob. And they're all like hanging on this couch going, beat the horse, beat the horse. And this is all part of his dream. And so he's whipping this horse. And eventually he kind of busts out like a crowbar. And he gets out, and I mean, he's beating the horse, they're like whipping it on its eyes. It's just like, it's just going, and it's trying to move, and it's just like this miserable horse. And this kid is seeing this, and he's like, Dad, why are they doing that to that poor horse? And I'm imagining, like my son, because this kid's like about 11. I'm imagining my son seeing it. This is really heartbreaking. This scene that's part of his dream. It's disturbing. And this guy's beating his horse, and eventually pulls out like a crowbar. And he comes out with it and just starts beating the life out of this horse. Just, I mean, he's finishing it off. And all the drunkards are like cheering him on. They're like, yeah, get the horse. And then there's like a group of onlookers who are sober, who are standing over here, and they're like, why are you doing that? You're a horrible man. Shame on you for abusing an animal. And he's like, mind your own business. This is my horse. Leave us alone. And they're like, his whole posse, they're like, yeah, fuck you. Go the horse. And he's just beating this horse to death. And the kid just starts crying. He sees this and he's crying. And finally, he gives the final death blow to this horse. And this poor old nag just sinks down to the ground and its eyes close. And it's done. And this little kid he just can't believe it. He's like, Dad, why did they do that to the horse? And he goes over to this horse and he pets the horse and he kisses it. He kisses it on its head. He kisses its wounds. And he's so sad. And Raskolnikov wakes up. And he's like, oh, fuck, man. That was a fucked up dream. He's like, thank God it's not real. And immediately one of the first things he thinks about is this woman that he's been thinking about killing. And he's like, oh, am I really going to do that? Am I really going to take an axe to this woman and step in her blood and steal her things and, rob her and kill her? Am I really going to do this? And he decides to himself, he's like, I can't do it. Like I was there yesterday, and I thought about it, and I chickened out, and I left. I know that I can't do this. And so he decides to go home at this point. And for some reason, he decides to go the long way. Even though he's tired and sick and wants to hurry up and get home and lay down, he decides to go the long way by the Haymarket. And as he's passing the Haymarket, that's when he sees the sister of the pawnbroker. And he sees her cutting a deal with one of the vendors at the market. And she's making a deal, and she's like, I'll be here tomorrow, at this and this time. And, don't tell my sister about it. She doesn't know that I'm going to be here. So, don't tell her, because I guess the pawnbroker had a really strong, domineering kind of stranglehold on her sister. And so her sister is this really meek, quiet girl that is dominated by, her older sister, the pawnbroker, who's really, kind of a manipulative bitch. That's why he wants to kill her. She's just kind of a terrible person. And so he's got this fantasy in his mind and this plan to kill her. And he decides just 5 minutes before that he can't go through with it, and decides I'm going to forget about it. There's no way I'm going to go through with this. But for some reason, because of fate, somehow, he decides to go the long way home and pass by the Haymarket and sees the sister of the pawnbroker making an appointment with a vendor to meet with them. And I guess she's going to pick up some stuff, some hay or something, I don't know. And so at that point, then he knows for certain that the sister's not going to be around, and that he's going to get this woman alone, and that he's finally going to do the deed. And he sees it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and he knows that it's never going to happen again. It's never going to happen like this ever again. And so it's settled by fate, because fate brought him to that point to where he saw the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that he knew that he would have her alone, that he would have the opportunity to kill her. And so his mind is now changed. Almost as if it's not really his mind. It's just like the situation changed. And therefore his fate changed. So his sister's getting married to this guy who's this pretty wealthy business owner. And this follows this really bad scene where this guy getting to marry his sister was almost this sort of consolation prize of this really humiliating thing that happened to his sister, where she was accused of trying to sleep with this other woman's husband, which she didn't do. The guy was making advances on her, and she was saying, no, this is not right. You're a married man. What are you thinking? And so somehow it gets twisted around where she was the one trying to seduce him, and her name was dragged through the mud, and she was treated horribly by all these people. Just basically everyone in town was calling her a whore and all this stuff, and it was the guy's wife who was telling everybody this. And then she found out that it was really her husband that was doing it. That, I don't know if he confessed it to her. Somehow it came out that it was really him that was trying to hit on Raskolnikov's sister. And she basically went around apologizing to everybody and told everybody the truth. And so, as a sort of consolation prize to this girl, this woman sort of offered up her, sort of wealthy business owner, I don't know if it's a brother or what, but somebody in her family. And so she arranges a marriage because she ruined this girl's reputation by going around telling everybody in town she's a whore, or trying to seduce her husband. So she feels really bad. I mean, the woman feels bad about what she did. And in the meantime, the girl made no attempt to try to, defend herself. She just kind of accepted everybody's abuse. And they were going to lynch her for this stuff. And so this woman sort of offered up this kind of well-to-do business owner as a husband for Raskolnikov's sister. And the mom is describing this in this letter, and it's kind of funny because it's plain as day to the reader that the mom is totally deluded as to what's going to happen. Like, she's saying that the future is looking really bright, she's going to marry this guy and he can give you a job, and then you can work, and meanwhile mom and sister are doing everything they can. They're sending him what little money they have, where he could be supporting himself. He's being totally negligent and complacent and lame. He's being a total bitch. And his mom encloses what money she can. She owes money to this other guy. She's got this creditor that she owes money to, and she's paying him high interest, and the only thing she can do is knit these garments in order to earn money. And it's just, she's not going to earn anything. But she's basically saying that, okay, so now your sister's going to marry this dude. We're going to move to St. Petersburg, I think it is. And she's going there with nothing. She's basically showing up with $5 in her pocket, thinking that this guy's... And she's like, oh, well, he's not going to let me live with them in the house. I'm going to have my own place. So this guy's a jerk. This dude, he's got a business, but he doesn't want to do anything for Raskolnikov's mom or sister. He's just like, okay, well, I'll marry the girl, but you guys are kind of on your own. I'm not going to be around. I work all the time. I'm going to be away on business all the time. Basically, you could be my wife, but it's just kind of, you're going to be basically in the broom closet the whole time. And so he basically promises her nothing. And the mom thinks that he's going to give a job to Raskolnikov, and Raskolnikov's reading this letter going, Mom, why are you being a fool? You're being an idiot. This guy's not going to give me a job. He doesn't even want to work with this guy. He actually kind of wants to kill the dude. He's like, I will not let this guy marry my sister. He's thinking in his mind, he's like, this is not happening on my watch. And but he's trying to figure out how he can prevent it from happening, because he really doesn't have any right to tell his sister, you can't marry this guy. Oh, and not only that, but the business owner guy doesn't even want to pay for the transportation for her mom to get to St. Petersburg. She's going to have to basically ride on an ox cart to get there. So he's paying for their luggage to go, but not for them. Their personal passage is on them. He's not paying for anything. He's got money and he's doing nothing for these people. So Raskolnikov's thinking about how he can prevent this from happening. Okay, so Raskolnikov is pondering the possibility of maybe trying to find a little bit of work. While he's out and about, he sees the sister of the pawnbroker that he wanted to murder. And he overhears a conversation that she's having where she reveals that she's not going to be home, and so the pawnbroker is going to be left in her apartment. He knows exactly when she's going to be alone, and so he's already been considering killing this woman, but he's already kind of decided that he's sort of chickened out. He's like, I was over there the other day and I didn't do it, and he's been thinking about it, but he's like, I probably won't do it. But what happens is that an opportunity presents itself because he sees her sister talking to some people, and she sets an appointment with these people for the very next day, and he knows that this is his opportunity. This is his golden opportunity to kill this woman. And so it's kind of already decided for him. It's almost like he doesn't even have a choice at this point, because it's just like fate has just like opened the book. And the part where I left off was that he was presented with this opportunity to where now he knows that he can kill this woman. Like he's like, he knows she's going to be alone, and he knows that this is his one opportunity to do it. And so he knows deep down he's going to do it. Whereas before, he kind of written it off until this opportunity presented itself. So it's almost like fate has sort of made this happen. I mean, he already had it in his heart to do it, but he was kind of chicken shitting out and wasn't going to do it. And then, it finally presents itself to him. It's almost like the devil brings it to him. And so that's where I left off on that one. So we'll leave it at that.